So today we're going to continue to take a look at our work with multiplying decimals and whole numbers within this topic. In 4-1, we looked at using patterns of 10 to find a solution. Today we're going to be looking at how to estimate products of decimals and whole numbers. So your learning target is I can estimate the product of a decimal and a whole number by using rounding and compatible numbers. So if we take a look at our first problem that we're going to look at is on the bottom of, or is that on page 172 in the visual example. And it says a wedding planner needs to buy 16 pounds of sliced cheddar cheese. About how much will the cheese cost? And then it says $2.15 per pound. So this problem tells me that I'm going to estimate because it gives me the keyword about. So when I see about, that means that I'm going to estimate. And when we estimate, we're really looking at two different strategies. The first strategy that we're looking at is rounding. And rounding is where I'm going to take both values and I'm going to round to a place value. So rounding is where I'm going to a place value of some kind, whether it's the whole numbers or I'm going to the nearest 10. But when I do rounding, I'm rounding to a place value. Whereas compatible numbers, when we talk about compatible numbers, we're looking at values that are near the original number. And if you remember, with estimation, there is not one right answer unless you're having to round to a specific place value. You may want to be looking for the best estimate, and so that's going to change your thinking a little bit. So sometimes I might use rounding, I might use compatible numbers, but when I have the term about, that tells me that I'm looking for an estimate. Okay, so if I go back to that original problem, the original problem was I had 16 pounds of cheese, and I'm going to multiply that by $2.15. Now, I am more than likely going to, when I estimate and I have a whole number with a decimal, I'm going to just round this value to the nearest whole because I want to make my estimations as easy as I can. And so because I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, I'm going to underline the ones place value. And then if you recall, we look to the right. So if I underline the place value, it's a 2. The ones place value, I look to the right, I have a 1. So I'm going to round down. So I'm going to round $2.15 to 2. And then 16, because I'm going to round first, 16 I'm going to round to the nearest 10 because that's my closest place value. So the nearest 10 is where I'm going to round. So 16 is going to become 20. So 20 times 2 is going to be $40. So that's the rounding. I rounded to the nearest whole number, which is a place value, and to the nearest 10, which is another place value. When I take a look at it with a compatible number, so compatible number that I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, take $2.15 because I don't know how to multiply decimals at this point in time. So I'm going to take what I know and I'm going to round this $2.15 to the nearest whole number. So it's going to stay 2. And then 16, I'm going to pick a value that's going to be near 16 that's going to be easy to multiply. Well, I may know what 2 times 16 is. And so if I know what 2 times 16 is, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave it. And when I multiply that, I'm going to get 32. Okay. If I did 10 multiplied by 2, that's probably going to be too low of a value, but I could do 15. I could probably figure out 15 pretty easily. So 15 times 2 would be equal to 30. Now, the best estimate that we're going to have is going to be the one that's going to be the closest. So our closest estimate that we have is actually going to be the 16 times 2 because I only rounded the value of the 2. That's my best estimate. My rounding was an overestimate, and then my compatible numbers was an underestimate because I rounded both values down. All right, so let's take a look at your convince me. So the convince me says about how much money would 18 pounds of cheese cost if the price is $3.95 a pound. Use 2 different ways to estimate the product. So the 2 ways that we've talked about are rounding and compatible numbers. So those are going to be the 2 ways that I use. And then it says, are your estimates overestimates or underestimates? So I had 18 pounds, and that cost about $3.95 a pound. So again, with rounding, I'm going to start with that one because that one's just using what I know about place value. 18 is going to round to 20. So I rounded up here, and then $3.95 is going to round to 4. So I rounded up here for a total of $80. So because I rounded both values up, this is going to be an overestimate. Now let's take a look at using compatible numbers. So when I look at compatible numbers, again, I'm going to take my decimal because I don't know what 395 is by whatever value. I, at this point, have not learned how to multiply decimals, so I want to make it easy on myself. I'm going to multiply that by 4 because I can figure out 4 pretty easily, and then I'm going to multiply. Now, I don't know what 18 times 4 is pretty quickly. That's not a fact that I'm familiar with, but I do know what 15 is, because 15 times 2 is going to be 30, so 15 times 4 is going to be 60. Now let's take a look at what I did here. Here, I rounded down, and here, I rounded up. Because the amount that I rounded down here was larger than what I rounded down here, this is going to be an underestimate. So which value is going to be the better estimate? And the value that's going to be the better estimate is actually going to be the 15 multiplied by 4, because I only rounded down a little bit here, and then I rounded up a little bit here. So this is going to be closer to my actual answer than 20 multiplied by 4. Okay. If we go and we take a look at our next one that we're going to look at, our next example, this one's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to have a value that's going to be less than 1. We've been looking at values that are greater than 1, and so I've been rounding to the nearest whole number. So if I were to use rounding and I round to the nearest place value, the nearest place value that I have for 105 is going to be 100. And then if I have the nearest place value, 7,500 hundredths, the nearest place value is going to be 1. So my answer is going to be 100. Well, that's not really going to be as helpful as an estimate as it would be if I were to use my patterns of 10. So my patterns of 10, I only really am going to want to change the 105. So if I change the 105 to 100, so let me change colors here. So if I change the 105 to 100 and left the 7,500 hundredths alone, I just used compatible numbers because I didn't round both values. I only rounded this one value to 100, and I left 7,500 hundredths alone. So here, if I multiply by 100, remember we talked about in 4-1 that when we multiply by place value, that means we're moving our decimal however many places we multiply to the right. So here I have 2 zeros, so that means I move my decimal 1, 2. So my new answer is going to be 75. Oh, not 7,500 hundredths. It's going to be 75. Okay, so let's take a look at another one of those and see how it goes. So we're going to jump into number 1, and it says Menya walks a total of 75 hundredths of a mile to and from school each day. There had been 105 school days so far this year. About how many miles has he walked at all? We just answered that. He's walked about 75 miles. Now let's take a look at number 1, which is number sense. So number sense says there are about 20 school days in a month. So if there are about 20 school days in a month and he has walked 75 hundredths of a mile, I want to know how many miles that he's walked. So I'm going to use a little bit of number sense here. So this is going to look a little bit different than some of the work that we've done with estimating. So 75 hundredths is going to be equal to 3/4 as a fraction. So I don't know what 3/4 of 20 is yet, but I can get there. I need to figure out what 1/4 of 20 is first. So to figure out what 1/4 is of 20, I'm going to take 20 and I'm going to divide that by 4. So when I divide that by 4, I get 5. So if 1/4 is equal to 5, then 3/4 is going to be equal to 15. So 20 multiplied by 75 hundredths is going to be 15. He walks about 15 miles a day. Okay. If we take a look at number 2, it says without multiplying, which estimate in another example do you think is the correct? Is closer to the exact answer. Explain your reasoning. And so we did these. I just made them look a little bit different. So the first one that I had, so we're going back to that 105 multiplied by 7,500. So we're looking for the estimate that's going to give me my exact or give me a closer estimate. So if I have 105 multiplied by 1 and I get 105. Well, we already talked about that. I don't think this is a very good reasonable estimate because this was a big amount that I had to round by. 25 hundredths is a big amount in terms of the world of decimals. In fact, if I were to take 100 and I were to multiply that by 8/10, the amount that I rounded 100 down by is going to be a lot less than what I rounded 75 hundredths by to get to 1. So this value right here is going to be closer because 8/10 is closer to 75 hundredths. So it's going to give me my more exact answer. All right, let's go through and let's do a couple of problems. So I have 87 hundredths multiplied by 112. So again, when I have a value that's less than 1, I am going to just keep it as much as I'm just going to leave it alone. So I'm going to leave 87 hundredths alone. And then I'm going to take 112 and I'm going to turn this one into a place value. So 110 is not a good value because I don't know what 11 times 87 is. But 100, if I multiply that by 100, now I'm using my patterns of 10 where we said, hey, if I multiply by 100, that means I'm moving my decimal 2 digits to the right. So my new answer is going to be 87. Notice that I showed this step right here. This models your thinking. You need to show this. So that's modeling with mathematics. So model your thinking. That is something that good mathematicians do. You always need to model your thinking. Go through the next one. So the next one I have is going to be 104, and I'm going to multiply that by 33 hundredths. So when I do 104 multiplied by 33 hundredths, well, 104 is going to be near 100. So I'm going to multiply that by 33 hundredths. I'm going to leave that alone. So I'm using a compatible number here. I left this value alone, and here I rounded to the nearest place value. So 33 hundredths. I'm going to move my decimal over 2 places to the right, and I get 33. So a good estimate for that answer. My answer is going to be somewhere around 33. Okay, now I have 9 and 2 hundredths multiplied by 80. So when I take 9 and 2 hundredths and I multiply that by 80, this one, I'm going to leave 80 alone because 80 is already nearest 10. It's going to be easy to multiply. The 9 and 2 hundredths, I'm going to change that to 9 because now my answer is 9 times 80. So I can use that multiple of 10 rule and say I'm going to get rid of the 0 here and put it over here. And now 9 times 8 is going to be 72. My answer is 720. Okay, I have 54 hundredths multiplied by 24. So let me point something out here. 54 hundredths is going to be near 0.50 or 0.5. This value right here, this is a value you need to know. This is equal to 1/2. So I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to round this down to 1/2, and I'm going to multiply this by 24. So I'm going to use some number sense. When I multiply something by 1/2, so if I have here 1/2 multiplied by 24, another way that I can look at this is 24 divided by 2. These two equations are going to be equal. When I multiply by 1/2, what I'm really doing is I'm taking that value and I'm dividing it by 2. So 1/2 multiplied by 24 is the same as me saying 24 divided by 2, which equals 12. So anytime you can round it to a half,